In this video we'll discuss how you can implement cascading drop-down boxes using the client-side data cache as the data source for the drop-down boxes. So when you implement cascading drop-down boxes using the client-side data cache, you can then have your drop-down boxes work correctly even when you don't have a connection. So normally when you implement cascading drop-down boxes, a connection is needed because an Ajax callback is made to populate the child drop-down boxes. So you can see here we have a cascading drop-down box designed in the standard way using the built-in features in the UX component, and you can see that when I make a selection in the country field, the city drop-down box gets populated. If I go there to say Italy, the drop-down gets populated. And if we go now and we look at the developer tools and look at the network traffic here, we can see that when we make a selection in the country field, there's an Ajax callback to the server to go and get the choices for the city field. So you can see there's our Ajax callback, and then in the Ajax response over there we get the list of cities that we're going to use to populate the drop-down box. But this requires a network connection in order for the drop-down boxes to work. So you can see that basically in this component here, the country field is populated basically by setting the choices to a SQL query. And then for the city field, we've also specified the choices using a SQL query, and then we've specified that this is a cascading drop-down box. But this wouldn't work if we didn't have a network connection, so it wouldn't work in a disconnected scenario. So now let's go and take a look at how the same cascading effect can be created using the client-side data cache so that it'll work when you're disconnected. So in this component over here, you can see that we have again implemented drop-down, cascading drop-down. So when I go and choose, say, Ireland, we can see that we changed our list of choices there. But if we go and look at this in the browser and look at the network tools, we'll see that let's just go and turn on network tools here and look at the network traffic. We can see that when we change the country here to go get a different set of choices for the city field, there's no Ajax callback anymore because the drop-down boxes are being populated from the client-side data cache. I'll go there and choose, for example, Spain, and now there are the choices for Spain. So let's go back now and take a look at how this was actually done. So if we go back to our UX component now, we can see that we start out with the same two drop-down boxes, country and city, but that initially country is populated with a static list of choices, and we just have a single value here called dummy, and the same thing is true of city, which is also populated with just a dummy value. Then you can see that we've defined a client-side data cache, and there are two items in this client-side data cache, one called country, which is basically making a query against the Northwind customer table and getting the country field sorted by country. So if we go look at the data, we'll see that we basically have a JSON array of objects, and each object, each item in the array is an object with a country property. Then if we go look at the city client-side data cache, we can see that this is an array of cities, and each item in the array has both the city and also the country, and we need to have the country in this array here because we're going to filter the data based on the selected country. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now to look at how cascading drop-down boxes can be defined using the client-side data cache as the data source for the drop-down boxes. So this is the data in the client-side data cache for the city item, and of course the query here basically returns data from both city and country, and we sort it by country and city. So So now we have our two client-side data caches defined, and you can see now that let's just go here to client-side and just turn this off. I'm going to just temporarily turn this off. So now when I go ahead now and I run the component, both the country and the city drop-down have just this dummy value in them. So there's no real data at this point in the drop-downs. So now let's basically go ahead and press this button that says populate country, and now we can see that the country field has data in it. So when we click the populate country button over here, we're calling a function called populate country, and if we go look at the JavaScript for that function, so here's populate country, you can see that what we're doing is we're reading the value from the client-side data cache. So we're reading the value from the country client-side data cache, and then in the on success of this method. So when you read data from a client-side data cache, it's always asynchronous. So there's always an on success callback if the reading is successful. So you can see that in the on success here, we get past all of the data that got read from the client-side data cache, and then we're going to basically loop through the data, constructing an array of choices, and then once we've constructed that array of choices, we're going to call the populate dropdownbox method, which is described over here. So let's go over here to insert method and then just type in drop down. So you can see there's a populate dropdownbox method of the UX object, and the syntax is populate dropdownbox, the name of the dropdown box, and then an array of choices, and then either true or false depending on whether you want to keep the existing choices or remove all of the choices that are currently there. So this is how we populate the country field, and since we want the country drop-down to be populated immediately, we put the same function here, populate country, we put that in the client side on render complete event. So now when we go here to on render complete, as soon as we render the component, the country drop down is going to have its choices in it. So let's go now and actually debug into this method, into this function, so we can see actually what it's doing. So I'm going to go over there into populate country, and I'm going to put a debug statement in the on success. So I'll go there and type in debugger, and then I'm going to switch over to working preview, and I'm going to change over to Chrome work. Actually, I can just use Internet Explorer as debugger over here. So we'll bring up Internet Explorer debugger, and now we can step through the code. So we can see now that we're inside the on success function, and we can look at the data that got passed into this function. So let's just go here and type in data actually, and then let's just go and delete all of the existing watch variables. So if we look at data, we'll see that data is an array, and each item in the array is an object with a property called country. So now as we step through this, you can see that we're going to basically loop over this array and push onto this ARR variable the actual data. So if I look at ARR right now, it just has one item in it, Argentina, and then as we go through the array, you can see we're basically adding new items into the array, and eventually we're going to have basically an array of all of the countries with a blank country at the top, and then we're going to basically populate the drop-down box. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at how cascading drop-down boxes are implemented using the client-side data cache as the data source for the data. So let's just go ahead now and run this, and so we can see now that the country field, the country drop-down has been populated. So now when we make a selection here, we go and we populate the city drop-down with the choices for the selected country. So go to Italy, and you can see that we have the choices for Italy. So going back again to design mode here, we see that in the country drop-down box, in the on change event over here, we're going to call another function called populate city, and we're going to pass into this function the currently selected value in the drop-down. So this dot value gives us the name of the country that has been selected in the country drop-down, and then we're going to call this populate city function over there. So if we go over to our JavaScript functions, we can see that populate city is essentially identical to populate country, the only difference being that in this function over here, the onSuccess function, which actually populates the array, we only populate the array if the country matches the selected country. So as you recall, when we created the client-side data cache for the city item, we basically included both the city and the country. So this data object over here has both a country property and also a city property. So you can see that in our onSuccess, only if the data country matches the passed in country do we push the value onto the array. So this is going to give us, this ARR here will be an array of all the cities that match the selected country, and then we populate the drop-down box with those choices over there. So another way in which we could have also done this is, you can see here that the get from data cache has an optional filter property. So right now the filter property is set to blank, but we could have set the filter to data.country equals and then the passed in country over here. So had we set the filter like this, then we wouldn't have needed to add the filter over there. We could have just pushed all of the data onto the array as we did in this case over here. So what we've shown in this video is how the drop-down boxes can be populated from the client-side data cache, and how you can implement cascading drop-down boxes using client-side data. And this approach will work even when you don't have a connection to make Ajax callbacks to populate the child drop-down boxes. Thanks very much for watching.